Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny Panel. The first order of business today is to appoint a chair for the meeting. So can I receive a nomination, please?
I'd like to propose Councillor McKercher.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Is that seconded?
I'll second that, yeah, Hannah McKercher.
Thank you. Councillor Hannah McKercher be appointed as chair for the meeting.
Thank you for that. So the next item on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence.
No apologies received, thank you.
Thank you. Can we then move to the minutes of the previous meeting? If someone is willing to approve those minutes. Thank you. Do I have to say, are we all in agreement? Is everyone else in agreement with that? Yeah, thank you. Item 4 is declaration of interests. So if any of you have any disclosable pecuniary interests on any items on today's agenda. Okay. And item 5 is for the admission of the public. As far as I'm aware, all items on today's agenda are for public admission. So. Do we have any deputations or petitions received?
None received.
Thank you. And do we have any public questions?
No public questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the main order of business today is to consider the environment strategy, everyday life. So I'm going to pass over to the Cabinet Member for Culture and Greener Kirklees, which is Councillor Afaq Butt.
Thank you, Chair. As you'll be aware, the environmental strategy is a top-tier priority for Leader of the Council. I'd like to introduce you to Rob and Kat, who will go through this.
Afternoon, everyone. My name's Catherine Armitage. I'm the Service Director for Climate Change and Environmental Strategy, and I've got my colleague Rob with me.
Hi everybody, I'm Rob Green, I'm the Senior Climate Change Officer for Kirklees Council.
So we're going to take you through the environment strategy today, explain a little bit about what it contains, how we've gone about producing it,
Yes, that would be lovely. Could we have introductions from the panel as well? Thank you.
It's all right. I thought I'd done something terribly wrong.
Gary, would you like to start? We'll work our way along.
I'm Gary, the Co-op Tea Committee.
John Taylor, Kirkburton Ward.
Will Simpson, Denberdale and formerly Inspirational Cabinet Member.
Councillor Matthew McLaughlin from the Colne Valley Ward.
Councillor Tim Manfred, Denberdale Ward.
Councillor Liz Sways, Chair of Scrutiny, here as an observer.
Thank you all. Are we okay to move on with the presentation? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take you through the strategy, explain how we've gone about producing it, and then take any comments, questions, and hopefully incorporate those in. So we know that the environment really matters to people in Kirklees and that it underpins pretty much everything else that we do. It's our home, it gives us the air that we breathe, places to relax, resources for our businesses and jobs, and it's also a place where nature can thrive. The aim of the strategy is to make the environment a priority in our decision making, big or small. To use the environment to enhance the lives of people day to day in Kirklees, and that's reflected in the title Everyday Life. Often the environment can be thought of as quite an obscure sort of future concept. Maybe people think of polar bears and rainforests, and they're very important things. But what we've tried to do with this strategy is reflect that this is something that influences and impacts on people's lives every single day here in Kirklees. And by improving the environment, we can improve people's quality of lives here and now. So if I explain a little bit about why we've developed the strategy and why it's needed. Most people will know we've got the council plan. which contains a number of key objectives, one of which is clean and green. Under the council plan, we have a series of what are called top-tier strategies. To date, we've had 3 of those: the health and wellbeing strategy, the inclusive communities framework, and the inclusive economy strategy. So to ensure that we are adequately reflecting the ambitions in the council plan in our top-tier strategies, we really needed to tackle environment. We needed to tackle the clean and green priority. So that's one of the rationales behind the document. But equally, we knew that none of our other strategies could be successful unless we tackled the environment too. So it would be really challenging for us to have to deliver on our health and wellbeing strategy if people were living in cold, damp homes and breathing in filthy air, for example. It would be really difficult for us to deliver on our economic strategy if we can't move goods and people around the district or attract new green businesses and industries. And the inclusive communities framework, I think, is absolutely fundamental to this. I think the environment agenda is actually, at its heart, an agenda about inclusivity and fairness, but people often don't see that or miss that point. If you think about the environment, we have a set amount of resources that we can use. We have one planet, it has a finite amount of resources on it. There's only so many trees we can chop down, there's only so many fish we can take out of the sea, and there's only so much pollution that it can absorb before we start to get problems. And what you tend to find is it's the unequal distribution and use of those resources that causes us problems. So often you will see, both globally and locally, some people use all the resources, and often a very different group of people suffer the consequences of that resource use. So you might see that you will have seen documentaries where waste from the UK, not Kirklees waste, I feel the need to say, ends up on somebody else's, in another country, outside somebody else's house. Where oil pipelines rip through villages and communities that aren't going to have any use of that. But more locally, you see it reflected in issues like people who are least likely to own a car, most likely to be subject to living on a really heavily polluted road, or more likely to be subject to being run over by a car in a road traffic accident because they live in heavily trafficked areas. So really, to address any of the other things we want to address, we also have to address the environment. So you might be thinking, well, surely we've got this covered, we've got a climate change action plan, have we not done everything we need to do? And we do have a climate change action plan. It's been recognised with an award from the Royal Meteorological Society. I can't say that word, can't get it out. We've also gone up in the grading for carbon disclosure project. We're now a grade A, which is the highest grade you can get on the back of that plan. But as you would expect, the Climate Change Action Plan tackles predominantly greenhouse gases and carbon, and its aim is to get us to net zero, and that is something that we will and absolutely must do. However, we can get to net zero and still have filthy rivers, dirty air, an ecological emergency, and all manner of other environmental problems. So if we want to tackle the environment in the round, we need to tackle more than just carbon. Equally, if we become too singular in our focus, we might be at risk of making poor decisions. So I'm sure you'll all remember many, many years ago, people were urged to go out and buy a diesel car because it was great for the climate. And diesel cars do produce less of the gases that contribute towards climate change, but they produce more of the pollution that's absolutely disastrous for our lungs. So it was a public health issue. Currently, you might see lots of plans that councils have for tree planting, and the focus might be on planting as many trees as quickly as possible, rather than on planting the right kind of tree. And that's because they're thinking about the ability of those trees to grow and suck up carbon, rather than the ability of the tree to not only do that, but to support biodiversity. So we wanted to look at environment in the round to ensure that we were making sensible decisions for our communities and the right decisions long term, rather than looking at any one issue in isolation. Equally, one of the things that seemed to be really important to the population was the concept of sustainability. So they didn't want us to just look at environment in the round, they wanted us to look at their lives in the round. You know, there's not much point saving the planet if we've done so by making everyone miserable and unhappy and they've all just got to sit at home counting carbon. You know, they need to have healthy, happy lives. Or if we've done so at the economic expense of one group of people over another. So if you look at the strategies we've got as a council now, we have got all of the key components of sustainability, with the environment one plugging what was the missing gap, because we've got health covered, we've got the economy covered, and we've got communities covered. we've also now got environment covered. So we've got the key components of sustainability when they're seen together. So they're all completely interwoven. So I've said a little bit about what people want and what was important to people. How would I know, I guess, is the key question. And I think it's important to say that I haven't written this document, Rob hasn't written this document, the environment team haven't. We've coordinated the thoughts, the opinions and the views of lots of people across Kirklees, our residents and countless partners too. And we didn't just go out to people and say, you know, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a solar panel or a heat pump? Would you rather have this tree or that tree? And people go, well, I don't know. I don't really know what either of those things are. We went out and said, do you think we need an environment strategy? To which people said yes. If we have one, how do you think we should structure it? What should be the framework of that strategy? And we spoke people through all the different things that already exist, and they wanted something bespoke, which is what we've ended up with. Then we said, if that's our framework, what are the targets that sit under that? And often what we found ourselves doing actually was mediating between groups, because different people will want different things, they won't always agree. So trying to pull everyone together under a one vision and one idea. Because at the moment, there's lots of people doing absolutely amazing things in our communities and across the council, but it's not coordinated, it's in different places, it's not brought together. So those individual actions that people are doing, it might be someone recycling uniform, it might be someone up on the moorlands, restoring peat habitat. They're all great. They're not even things we're doing or that we need to do because those people are doing them so well, but they do need coordinating and bringing together. So hopefully under the strategy, what we've done is bring people together to do that. So what is it we've actually decided we're going to do, which I guess is the important bit, isn't it? We've ended up with the strategy being split into a framework of 4 pillars. And they are closing the loop, nurturing nature, bringing it home, and Kirklees on the move. They're actually quite different than what we started with, in fact, very different. So I think that's good because it shows we have listened and it is a reflection of what people want. So closing the loop, often when we think about waste, we think about what we're going to do with waste once we've got it, how are we going to dispose of it, how we're going to recycle it. Closing the loop is going a step back and it's saying, how do we stop waste from being created in the first place? Or how do we deal with all of the things we consume and the impact that they have on the environment? So it's looking at all of different products and services, how they're the resources that are used to create them, how they're shared or not shared. So if you think at the moment you can pop in a library and get a book, wouldn't it be great if you could also pop in and get a power tool so everybody didn't have to own one that they only used once every 10 years. So it's very much about that broader look about our consumption of stuff and the impact all of that stuff has on the environment. Nature's exactly as you would expect. It's about our green spaces. It's about putting nature into recovery. It's about using nature-based solutions. It's about people's access to green and blue spaces. And restoration of some of the habitats are really special and unique to Kirklees. We have some fantastic habitats. And it came through really clear. It was something that people felt very, very strongly about and felt this strong sense of identity and connection to. Bringing it home, this is about the places people live. We want people to live in good quality neighbourhoods, in good quality homes, and then when they go to work, that workplace be a good quality green build too. Very much a focus on fuel poverty and helping people to afford energy, living good, clean homes. Kirklees on the moves, exactly as it sounds, it's about our transport infrastructure, getting people around and making sure people have access to good public transport too. So under those 4 pillars are 12 targets and then 31 wider objectives. So if we go on to the targets, oh no, we're not going on to the targets, sorry. I've missed probably the most important thing about the strategy actually, that there are 3 priorities as well, what we're calling always on priorities. So always on, I almost forgot them. That's not good, is it? So we said at the start, this isn't just about the environment, it's thinking in the round, thinking about people's lives and making sure we're doing the best thing for people in Kirklees. So every target we've got, every objective we've got, we've thought about in the context of these 3 priorities. So how does it link to sustainable economic growth? How does it link to resilient futures? So what on earth does resilient futures mean? That's how we protect our most vulnerable people from the impact of a poor environment, of things like increased flooding from climate change, so on and so forth. And then how do we make sure this agenda is for everyone? So environment for all. And a key point there is when we did this piece of work, when we started, we didn't start with the intention of doing as much engagement as we'd done. We started on quite a traditional route with a survey, asking a few people some things, and it became very, very apparent to us very early on that we weren't getting a representative voice. We just weren't hearing from all of the people in Kirklees. So we looked at who was missing, who hadn't responded, and we went out to groups where they were and we specifically spoke to them. Because it's really important, if this is about people's everyday life, we need to speak to everyone about that. We can't just have the voices of a few people, and a few people who already know and already care. So the targets. So we've got, under closing the loop, we've got 0 avoidable waste by 2038, and we've got growing the sharing economy in Kirklees to be a national leader. There is baseline data in the document and definitions of what all these terms mean as well. Under nurturing nature, we've got increasing Kirklees tree canopy cover to 21%. We've got homes in Kirklees to be within a 5-minute walk of an accessible green or blue space. We've got nature in recovery, and we've got degraded peatland to be restored. And then under bringing it home, we've got good buildings. So that's EPC level C or above. We've got a sustainable neighbourhoods programme, and again, the definitions of what those terms mean are in the document. We've got net zero energy, so that links into our climate change targets by 2038. Under Kirklees on the Move, we've got journeys being sustainable, we've got fleet vehicles being zero carbon, and we've got Kirklees homes to be within a kilometre of a public transport network. I think probably the key thing to say about the targets, a bit like the document, they're not our targets as a council, they're our targets as a district. So these are targets that we all came up with, and some of them are targets that our partners will deliver, or we will deliver an element of, and our partners will deliver an element of. I don't think any of these targets are targets that any one organisation or individual could deliver on their own. They have to be done as a collective, which is why we've developed the document in the way that we have. So we've then got these 32 objectives, but what I don't want to do is just read you a list of things that are in the document. So I'm going to scoot through those and get on to how we propose that we will actually deliver. So in terms of implementing the strategy, our intention is to do exactly what we've done in the development of it. So we've developed it with lots of people, so we've done it together. So our intention is to deliver it together as well. And we're asking people to pledge to the document and to pledge to what they can deliver. There's different levels of the pledge, and it might seem a bit overcomplicated. That was my initial thoughts, but there's actually some logic behind it that I'll explain. So you can pledge to the whole document, you can pledge to a theme, you can pledge to a specific target. That's the bit that possibly seems like, well, why all of those? That seems a bit much. And the rationale for that is that there are some organisations that do all of this stuff just like us, and there are other organisations that might do one very small, specific, but incredibly important thing in their community, and we want them to be recognised, we want their achievements and what they're doing to be seen. So it might be someone doing make amends sessions, you know, people bringing along goods for repair. That's a fantastic thing to do. They probably can't commit to the nature targets, but they almost certainly can commit to some of the closing the loop targets. And also by getting down into those grassroots groups in communities, we increase participation and we increase the number of people that are involved in terms of that environment for all element of this. So we've already got 10 partners signed up and pledged to delivery. And then we've got a number of other partners doing exactly the same thing we're doing here, taking it through their governance processes. So they'll be having meetings like this. In terms of under that pledge, we're proposing a partnership group to help us manage the document. So that would be split by the themes, and then in that we would would have a partner lead, a council lead, possibly people with technical expertise, but then a community lead. Now, the community lead could be someone with technical expertise, or it could just be someone who is there to hold us to account on those always-on priorities. So they're not necessarily, you know, a waste expert, but they do know whether we're being fair and we're including people, and they can challenge us if they think we're not. And then we would have all of the pledges sat under that as well. And then, as you would expect, our intention is to try and make this business as usual, to incorporate this into the council. So we've got a learning and development module that we intend to go live at the same time as the document goes live. We're working with different colleagues to show them how they can embed this into the day-to-day work, and we would hope and expect other organisations to do the same as well. And then, I mean, I think probably the key question, everyone sat there thinking, this is lovely, but money is a challenging area for everyone at the moment, and how can we resource this strategy, or can we even resource this strategy? So I think a key thing to say is that a lot of this is recognition of things that are already happening, and it's pulling them together and better coordinating them so they're greater than the sum of their parts. However, that isn't all it is. There is extra and new and ambitious things in there too. And one of the key things we've found from having a good, strong climate strategy is it's enabled us to leverage in funds, significant funds. And there's the same level of funds out there for other areas of environment that we're not currently leveraging in. We are leveraging some in, but we could potentially leverage in more if we had a really good plan. I think that's this really good plan to help us do that. And we've already seen some positives just by having a draft plan. So there's some nature funding that we've recently been able to bring in, which this has helped us to do that, to show people, you know, we have a plan for this money. It's part of a bigger thing, the community are engaged and involved. It's also recognising that in some cases we're not the best people to bring in the funds and do the work. It might be community groups or other people, and this gives them that remit to go out and do that and work together to do that. And then there's the other things you would expect. You know, there's things like net gain coming down the line, biodiversity offsets, there's things through planning, there's all sorts of other traditional funding routes as well that we would explore. And I think, I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I, because I work in environment, but a lot of these measures are evidence to save us money. So, you know, if we'd have done a lot of these 20 years ago, we'd be saving money now. So the quicker we get on and do these things, the quicker we get on and save money. And our focus will be very much on the measures we know have a return, a positive return on investment. So where we would save more money than we would spend if we did them, or were cost neutral. So that will absolutely be a key focus throughout all of our work, as you would expect. So governance and next steps. What happens next? Well, we're talking to all of you, hopefully get your views, we'll incorporate them in. We're obtaining more pledges, and this will go through a flight path, as you would expect, through to Cabinet and then Council. And I think that's it.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I'll open it up to the panel first for questions, and then try and sort of sum up at the end, if that's okay. So, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKirker, and thank you, Kat, Rob and Councillor Butt, and it's lovely to see you both again. I think this is, you would expect me to say this, a really great document. I love how clearly collaborative and co-worked it is, and I know how much work that's taken for you guys, so I really appreciate that. And I think you've done a fantastic job. Lovely picture of Councillor Butt in there. Assume it was taken a couple of decades ago, I think. I know what we're saying with trying to say with the everyday, life thing, but when I first read it, I did think it felt like the slogan for a hydrating shampoo. But I do appreciate what you're trying to do. On to my actual questions. I've got sort of three main ones. And I also wanted to acknowledge what you said there, Kat, about leveraging in funding. I know from when I was the Cabinet member and subsequently as well, as a council, both in the greener section of the portfolio, but also the culture one as well, we've been punching above our weight in recent years. And we are, maybe not by Andrew Cooper, but by everyone across the country who we bid for, I think we're recognised as a council that is leading and has good strategies and delivers in these areas. And it's only because of the work that you guys have done and us having strategies like this that we're able to do that. My first question was around the Restoring All Peatland pledge. As far as I'm aware, 'cause I used to do a little bit of work in the environmental scrutiny brief in Parliament when there was a lot of discussion around moorland burning. I know that a lot of peatland is damaged as a result of the rotational burning that happens because of grouse shooting on the moors, and we have quite a lot of moorland across Kirklees where that is a practice that happens. It's perfectly legal for the time being, but it's also sort of, for some people, a cultural thing. It's what the sport that they do. I think it's obviously a minority sport, but it's something that happens. But it does damage a lot of our peatland. Obviously, that's something that's not in our control as a council. And as you've said, this document isn't just for us as a council, or the action's just for us, it's for everyone. I was just wondering if you could, because obviously making it one of the 12 pledges, I think, is quite a big thing, because it's sort of, we're doing a graphic for it saying we want to do this. I'd be interested if you could expand a little bit on how we think we can work towards that pledge if the practice of like rotational burning continues to happen. I think it's very difficult for us to do that. And if you want to answer that, I'll come back in with the other two after.
Thanks, Will. I think one of the important things to start off with is the Moors for the Future, who are the organisation that's kind of spurred out of Peter Street National Park. They're one of the pre-approval pledges, one of the 10 that have already signed up, and they are have been extremely involved in this and are really, as you can imagine, really keen that this strategy goes through because of the invaluable work that they do. I think peatlands, Kat mentioned it in terms of our ecosystems, it's one of our most valuable. It provides so many different ecosystem services, protection of flooding, XYZ. And we did have a peatland inventory report commissioned in January 2022, which gives us a clear picture of what our peatlands look like. There's a bit of a snippet of that in Appendix D of the document, if you want to delve into a little bit more detail around the data. And I think Kat also mentioned the funding we've got around some of the nature funding we got recently. There's a project undergoing called the Calder and Combe Valley Landscape Recovery project that's in collaboration with Calderdale Council and other key environmental organisations, and that's looking at how we can better manage our landscapes, working with land managers, working with landowners to basically recover that nature exactly in line with what this target's trying to achieve. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach. It's through mechanisms exactly like this bid that we've got through that we can work with all those different actors that have a role and responsibility around land use management, in line with the organisations such as Moors for the Future that are already doing great work and have a plan, have tried and tested methods about how we actually achieve that recovery as well.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I know Moors for the Future do great work, and Matthew does a lot of work in his ward with, I think, them and many others. So, yeah, really important to recognise that. Completely accept what you've said, Rob. I think this sort of goes above us as a council in terms of what practices are allowed on land about whether or not we'll be able to achieve this. Because even with the best, if we did absolutely everything we could as a council, and Moors for the Future did absolutely everything that they could, if the certain practices continued and will continue to be legal for the next decade and a half, we wouldn't be able to meet that target. But, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be making it a part of our strategy if that's what we need to do. So I completely accept what you've said. My second question was just around on page 30 where it talks about the Institute for Government's projection of the cost of transition, which I think was 1.2 trillion or something. That's a combination of public and private. It's not. That's just it's a sum figure. It's not 1.2 trillion of public investment, is it? I believe, because if that's the case, I think it'd be helpful for us to put that there just to make it clearer, just because I think one of the things that can often become a barrier to people taking action or thinking that we can make a difference is thinking that it costs too much or it's not possible or it's not deliverable. And if someone comes away thinking that it's going to cost the Treasury £1.2 trillion, they're going to think, oh my God, why are we even trying? And actually, it's public, private, it's everyone.
Yeah, correct, yeah. It's a broad figure, so we can clarify that in the document.
Thanks, Rob. And then my final one was in relation to page 48, which is about the Environmental Strategy Partnership Group. Obviously, I know we've got the Climate Commission, which is obviously, as you were saying, climate and the action plan are separate to the broader environmental thing, but obviously there's a lot of interlinkage as well. I was just wondering how you saw the Commission going forward sit in with what we're trying to do here in terms of the partnership group, because obviously when we first intended on setting up a commission, we were impacted by things like COVID, and then post that we've had a lot of resourcing issues, and the Commission have wanted resources, and we wanted to do as much as we can with them, and there's been difficulties there. If we're creating the partnership group, I think this is a good opportunity for us to look again about how everything best sits together so that everyone can work together in the areas that they can have most impact.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. And we're having conversations with them all of the time about how they interact with this, how they link with it. They were one of the key partners that's been engaged numerous times while we did the document, and they pledged as well to the document. So they are a key part of the environmental work in the district, but as you would expect, they are more climate focused, although that they do spill over into other areas as well, because you can't just look at anyone in isolation. But I think it's just a continuous dialogue with them, because they're evolving as an organisation. They've recently become I'm going to forget the technical name of the company that they are.
Limited company by guarantee.
Yeah, so they're evolving and they're still finding their feet with that. So I think we have to give them a bit of time to understand where they are with that, how that fits with this, and then move forward together in some way. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Thanks, Cat and Robert. Quite a lot of comments, actually. But start with just saying that I'm fully supportive of what we're trying to achieve here. And my role today is a critical friend. And our role as Scrutiny is to scrutinise and question. So don't take it that because I'm saying I'd change this, it means that I'm not fully supportive, because you know that I am. Just initially on the actual report itself, Rob, under 1.4, where it talks about the impact of the strategy, it makes a comment about helping people save money, which I get. But then it talks about high inflation rates. Well, I'm just conscious this is on a flight path. You might want to revisit that statement as we go through, because inflation rates are falling. And by the time it gets to Cabinet, if we're talking sort of middle of the year, we just want to make sure that we're not saying things that perhaps a little out of date. The other bit that worried me about the report itself, and it's referenced in 2.2 in terms of cost breakdown, and also later on in 3.6 financial implications, a lot of talk about HR involvement and existing HR resources. That sets alarm bells off to me, that this could end up being a tick box exercise, that our HR team bring in all sorts of impact assessments, that everything you do, there's going to be a lengthy checklist that you have to fill in, tick box. And I know that this council is really, really good at implementing tick box exercises with assessments that have to be filled in with everything you do. That has a huge cost involved with it, and I'm not sure it has a huge benefit. So I'm flagging it now to say I will be quite outspoken about it if it transpires that this is the approach we're going with, that we're going to demonstrate how we're doing this by getting everybody in the council to fill in impact assessments every time they do anything, and it's a checkbox. And we see it with some of the, the other strategies that we have, the economic strategy, the inclusive community strategies. I recently was supporting Home and Neighbourhoods on an IT programme they're implementing, where I'm acting as a critical friend there for them. And they sent me the impact assessment they'd done, and this document that 2 or 3 people have been through, that was 40-odd pages long, that was literally a tick box. That's not valuable use of officer resources at a time when we don't have many officer resources. Well, we have plenty of demands on officer resources, probably a better way of putting that. So I'm just flagging that that's a genuine concern. And then, Rob, unfortunately, a typo in 3.6. For some reason, indirect financial, you've got in, little dash, direct, very top of page 17 on mine. It's the second paragraph in financial implications. You'll learn, Rob. Yeah, to be fair, I do tend to pick up typos. You'll learn that with me. In fact, people are disappointed if I don't find any in a report. But onto the detail. And my high-level comment, concern, question is around the headline targets. I don't particularly have an issue with the headline targets, but I'm always nervous with this council because, again, it's something this council is very good at doing, is plucking out targets and announcing them without clear definitions, without clear statements of what our current performance is and what the flight path looks like from now until a date. So some of these quote 2038, some quote 2030, 2026. What are the interim... I've managed big programs. The way you manage programs is you have interim milestones. I don't see any evidence of any of that. I don't see any evidence of definitions. We talk about all buildings will be energy efficient or a minimum EPCC by 2030. How are you going to do that? When you say all buildings, that means every single building in the district. Well, some of them will be heritage buildings you may not be able to put that into. Some of them, well, a lot of them will be privately owned. How are you going to force private landlords or owners to implement changes if they don't wish to? So I have worries that you've got, they look like nice, good to do. Nobody's going to object to these, whether, you know, sort of apple pie or whatever that term is. But it's actually, is that doable? Is that achievable? Are we going to fail because we put the wrong target, because we haven't thought through exactly the definition? I mean, there are others that are within here. All Kirklees households within 1 kilometre of public transport connection via a safe pedestrian route. Well, I reckon my residents in Flockton would argue that they haven't got a safe pedestrian route. But also, we have houses that are at quite a distance up the valleys, that they're going to be more than 1 kilometre away. So how are you going to achieve that target? Because to me, unless you're going to be putting buses that are going to these houses that are in the middle of nowhere, you can't achieve that. So you're setting out today, and we're already saying you're going to fail with that target because you set the wrong target. And this is my worry, that I don't want this to fail. I don't want this to be seen to fail. But I can read these and go, you're going to fail most of these because you haven't been precise enough in your definitions, and you need to do the work before you announce the target of how achievable that is and how you're going to get there and what those interim milestones are, what that plan looks like, so that as we work our way through it, we can monitor this. I made exactly the same criticism of the waste strategy when that came, because the waste strategy was talking about how it was going to improve the amount of recycling we did by, and I can't remember, it was probably about 2030 or something like that, but it had no interim steps. It had no plan. There was no way that they were going to check after 2 years to see whether they were on track or not. And you need to do that because then you need to take actions, mitigate if you're not on track. I don't see any of this in this document. This document tells me all the nice stuff we'd like to do.
Could
I
we
need to see the
see
stuff
if they want
behind
to
that.
come back with whether they do have some of that?
I've got all the questions as well.
What would you rather? Do you want to address that one first, or do you want to run through all of yours?
It's up to Kat, really. I'm here to help you guys, so. Yeah, if you want to. Yeah.
Whatever works best. So in terms of the targets, it's a strategy, so it is high level and it's not all of the detail. The detail will sit in action plans that are under it. So each of those themes links into action plans. So we've got a number of action plans at the moment, like the Air Quality Action Plan, the Climate Change Action Plan. We've got various different nature plans. So the real detail is in those documents that are like this big. They're not visionary, big strategic documents. They're detailed, nuts and bolts, how we're going to do this. So there are some in existence already, and there will be more that need to be done to explain the detail of some of those targets. So some of them are already there, but some of them aren't, and we will need to plug that gap with more work. we understand exactly what you're saying about the milestone targets. We've done some of that work in our heads, but we can't. The purpose of the document, and when we had those conversations with people about the document and what they wanted the document to be in the framework and what level it should sit at, people wanted a high-level vision, not detailed technical project plans. So that's what we've tried to reflect in that particular document. But the document isn't the work, it's just a reflection of what we want to do. The work, the real work, the detail that you're talking about, that's what the teams are doing behind the scene. I can go through some of the specific targets and some of the data on that, if that would be helpful on some of the ones you pulled out. So do you want to go through the data on EPC, Rob?
So the EPCC target, so it's important to understand the targets are a balance between the ambition of the district, i.e. the people who live, work and study here, and best practice approaches to these things. So the EPCC one is ultimately in line with the national government target for EPCC, and 2030 was the date that which reflects the ambition of the residents. We have data in Appendix D around EPCC certificates for domestic and non-domestic properties, so that's which is publicly available to us. And we know at the moment 35.1% of our residential properties in this district are C or above. So there is a fair chunk of properties there that need to go up to hit the C target, so they're D, E, F or G or below. And we've got the same figures for non-domestic as well. And the Kirklees on the Move target, the 1 kilometre of public transport connection, the one you specifically raised, we have an indication of that already in terms of data. So we know that 99.1% of residential dwellings in the districts are within a 500-metre radius of public transport options. But that's a mission that doesn't include the accessible pathway ultimately, or through a safe and accessible route. So we have elements of baselining there, and this is a target that's in line with sustainability standards as well. So new developments built to BREEAM sustainability standards show that they need to be within 1 kilometre of a public transport connection point via a safe pedestrian route. So there is academic grounding behind these targets alongside a reflection of ambition. But we do acknowledge that there's certain gaps in the baseline data that there is work ongoing to fill. So the accessible route, for example, is one of those that we know requires more extensive GIS analysis to get that pulled together.
I think probably the key is that what we've tried to do is get the balance between the ambition, the national targets that are already there that we will have to comply with anyway, and what is achievable, and try and get a level of ambition that's in line with the other strategic documents we've got as a council. So it is a and again, they're not the district's targets. So it's not how does the council do this, it's how does the council plus all the other various people like Wicker or Sustrans or the public transport operators who have been involved in the production of the document and helping set the targets, how did they feed into this as well? But it can, you know, as we move along, and we're monitoring these things, if there are targets that we need to amend or change, then we can do that, can't we?
So I'm probably more confused with your explanation than I was before we started. Either you have ambitions, which are aspirational, that's where we would like to get to, or you have targets which are hard fact datas, we will do this by this date. These to me feel more like ambitions and aspirations rather than achievable targets. And everything you said to me, you kept bringing in ambition, the word ambition. And I get that. And I'm ambitious for this strategy as well. But when you put down in paper, we will do this by a date, if you don't do it by that date, that is the perfect excuse for the skeptics to go, look, you didn't achieve it. So what I want us to do is to put down on paper things we will do, we will achieve. And we may have ambitions over and beyond that. But what I don't want to do is produce a document that when we set out, we're going to fail with. And we'll give those sceptics that brilliant opportunity to go, once again, they've failed, they haven't done this, they haven't achieved that. And that's what will get picked up by the general public. So it's really, really important that what we go out and say we're going to do, we know is deliverable. Not an ambition, not an aspiration, not something we'd like to do in an ideal world with everybody playing fairly and doing the right thing and stepping up. Because we know in practice not everybody will have the same, throughout the life of this, have the same commitment. They may have changing priorities, they may have different people, different players that come in. There may be other issues that come along that knock them off. You know, Wicker may decide they want to do something else, or, you know, whatever it may be. So let's have realistic targets that we know that we can. Let's overachieve. That's even better. But what you're doing is setting yourselves up to fail with these targets. And I don't want us to do that.
Okay, I can see what you're saying. I think that there's a balance. There is a balance to be had, though, in that we've co-designed the document with lots of residents who've told us what their vision and ambition is, and we've said we'll try and reflect that. So, and it is meant to be a strategic, visionary document that outlines our ambition. I would say that I would hope and think, and looking at the data, that most of the targets in there are achievable. Some of them are very tough and stretch and are more visionary, but I would say, you know, that some of them we know for sure, absolutely, because, but there's got to be a level of ambition in there as well, hasn't there? There's got to be, and it's got to sit in line with what people are telling us they want, what people are saying is important to them. And we're coordinating all of those views from all of the various different people and partners. And to go back to partners who say, we really want to do this and we think we can do it, and maybe they're working in nature and we say, we don't think you can, would be really, you know, that's their ambition, and we've got to balance off an ambition with a realism. And I think we've kind of tried to, you know, we've done that.
I'm sorry, Kat, I fundamentally disagree with you. You know, when I was little, if I had an ambition to be an astronaut, should people have told me, yeah, you're going to be an astronaut, even if I didn't have the skills? You know, I want to be a Premier League footballer, but I can't kick a ball. Should we say, well, yeah, that's what you should put down as your ambition? What you do is you find people's skills, you find out what they're good with, and you encourage them in that area. And that's not what you do. You're saying just because somebody came along and said, if I came along and said, well, I want a bus every 10 minutes outside my house, you're going to put that in the strategy?
No, absolutely not.
So exactly, but that's my point. You've got to be realistic about what is deliverable and achievable, and you're not being realistic about what is deliverable and achievable. You're being ambitious and aspirational, and that's absolutely fine, and that is what we should all aim for. But that's not what you put in a strategy document that you're committing the council to delivering. And that's what this is. This is the council's strategic document.
The council's not the only delivery partner, is it?
So we're going to. Well, what's the point in having it then if the council isn't going to own it?
Can I just ask people to use microphones if they're speaking, just so that everyone can hear any comments? Thanks, Councillor.
Just one point that I've probably not made as clear as I should have, that the targets are based on other research and best practice of things that have been achieved and are achievable elsewhere. So we know that these things aren't, you know, complete pie in the sky. It is grounded in evidence base of things that other people have managed to achieve in other places by putting in place programmes of work. So we know these types of targets are achievable if you put the right resources and time and effort into them. So we haven't just plucked, we have taken people's ideas and we have tempered those ideas as well. So where people have come up with things that are far too ambitious, in that we know there's no best practice to support that's deliverable, we haven't put that in. So there's that balance between people's ambition and what we know to be best practice and deliverable based on evidence elsewhere. Sorry, because I don't feel I made that as clear as maybe we should have done.
It doesn't make any difference. There is no way by 2038 you're going to have all Kirklees households within 1 kilometre of public transport connection point via a safe pedestrian route. We know that. We know you can't do that, but you're setting that down as a hard target. That's my point. You know, before you start, you've failed.
That's the point of this, isn't it? To find out what people think. So let's take that one away. Let's have a look and let's see if it is or isn't, and if we need to modify it or not. Then that's why we're here, isn't it?
Oh, my next points were, I mean, there's loads of little bits, but I'll feed those back later. It was about the partnership. I'm trying to find it. What page was that partnership thing on? 39. I've gone past it, haven't I? No, where's the picture?
48, sorry, I lied.
Yeah. Just for partnerships felt wrong. The top green box. Told you I find them. This is another example for me of Kirklees, what Kirklees does well, and I'm being critical here. Kirklees loves setting up big, complex partnership arrangements where there's lots of people coming together lots of times, talking about lots of stuff, and it's very, very unclear to see the value out of that. This is a talking shop. That's what that is. That's a talking shop. Everybody's got, it even says it's a talking shop because it talks about, networking opportunities and things like that. That's not work. That's people coming together and chatting about stuff and sharing their thoughts and views and aims and aspirations. And that's a lot of people, a lot of time. My other thing on it is you seem to have missed out of this entirely. Elected representatives of communities. So councillors are elected representatives, they're not community leads. We put ourselves up once every 4 years. I joke about, I get an appraisal every 4 years by my community. If they're happy, I'm back. If they're not, I'm not. But they elect me to represent them. They elect me to represent their views. They elect 69 councillors to represent the views of the residents of Kirklees. And yet you're setting all this stuff up and you're not including them.
So I think you make a really, really good point on political representation and council representation. And I know that throughout, when we did the document, we came to political groups twice, didn't we, in the development? And so we probably need to think about how we haven't just done it in the development, but we need to do it in the delivery too. It's a good point. We engage political groups during the co-production stage, and how do we maybe engage them better afterwards. In terms of the partnership group and it being a talking shop, that's what we don't want. I'm going to give, how do I put it? There's no way any one organisation is solving the environmental problem on its own. If we take the issue of carbon, for example, as an isolated one, the council's direct emissions are about 2.5%. We have influence over about a third. That means 2/3 of what we need to do is other people, other organisations, and that is reflected across the whole environment agenda. If we are going to deliver on environment, we need lots of people working together towards a common goal. And the only way we can get people to work together is to get them together in working groups. So if we don't convene people around the strategy and around the various action plans that will sit under it, we'll really struggle. But I think you make a really good point on member representation. We need to have a think about that, and equally we need to have a think about how this doesn't become a talking shop, because that's not the intention, so let's make sure that's not what it becomes.
My other point on this is it talks a lot about data collection, evaluation, reporting and all kinds of stuff, and I can see here's another huge cost for the council in terms of producing all of this evidence to justify these targets that we set which weren't achievable in the first place. And I'm uncomfortable that rather than focusing on the actions, there'll be a lot of focus on producing justifications and data, and it talks about data collection, reporting and all that kind of stuff. Personally, that you'll probably spend lots and lots of time having all of these meetings discussing about how you define the data and what people's views on the data and gathering all of that. And that's what this meeting will spend all of its time doing. You won't actually be taking any actions.
I think monitoring evaluation is a internationally agreed best practice approach to how you get successful plans and strategies implemented. You can't inform the action you take without a comprehensive understanding of the state of play and how you're progressing against those targets. So it's a fundamental part of the strategy that's needed if we want to translate it from paper to on-the-ground action.
Move on.
I was just going to let Matthew
move on. What I do love
John, can we just make sure that all the panel get a chance to make...
Yeah, absolutely. So what I do love is Appendix E, because Appendix E is the bit about the ideas, although some of them I'm not quite sure I understand, but there is stuff in here that, you know, you and I have talked about that I'm fully supportive of. I would have liked to have seen more about, and it probably is picked up somewhere, but I can't quite see it fully, about the circular economy, and particularly with supporting businesses through developing circular economy approaches. I don't know whether that's what industrial symbiosis means. I didn't actually know what that means. It's like, but again, if I don't understand what it means, maybe just reflect if this is a public-facing document. Are we using words that those in the know, but if we want the general public to understand, if I don't understand it, they probably won't either. But I love the stuff about... Pardon? Well, I didn't go to university, mate, so that's probably what the problem is. But, you know, again, I love the stuff about Waterloo. You picked up my point about Waterloo being an interchange hub. Talked about that a number of times in these scrutiny meetings. I'm not sure what we mean under 20. Leverage parks and public green spaces to greater effect. I'm fine with that. Making them exemplar locations to have multifaceted benefits for nature and people.
So we did a lot of workshops and people filled in a lot of post-its. And I think the person that filled in the post-it would probably be the person best placed to explain properly what they meant. We've tried to interpret it through the document, and we think we've interpreted what people have said right, because when we've written the document, we've gone back and said, these are the ideas you gave us. Does this reflect what you were asking for?
But again, it's a public-facing document.
Yeah.
If I don't understand what it means, is the average person in the street can understand what it means. And if the average person in the street doesn't understand what it means, they're not going to buy into it. So I do think on some of these you need to think about the language that's used. You know, it's about making it easier for people to understand, not just the technical experts.
I think, unless you disagree, I think we've achieved that in the main body of the report itself, but we can go away and focus on maybe reassess some of the actions and how they're worded in this appendix to make them more accessible.
Yeah, because some of them are direct quotes from what people have asked for reflected in appendix, whereas the main body of the document, we've tried to translate that into what we believe is a bit more everyday. I'm glad you really like the circular stuff. I think that is a massive opportunity for Kirklees. Circularity is something that really, I think, speaks to our heritage as well. We've got this really rich textile heritage. There's fantastic things already happening in the district, at the university, with the council, with our businesses, and I think there's a real opportunity to do more and do it really well in that area. And also a point of difference to, it's a lot of people don't think about circularity. They do just think in that very linear way about how we get rid of our waste once we've got it. So I think it's a real point of difference for us as a council as well, that we're looking at that and take it seriously. And ultimately, of all of our environmental impacts, the consumption of lots of things that we really don't need or we're throwing in the bin 5 minutes later is one of the really big ones. So it does need tackling.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to move to Councillor McLaughlin now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you very much for the presentation and for the document. I quite liked it. I like the targets and I like the ambition, and I recognise that it is ambition because this is how ambitious humanity needs to be to survive. So, these need to be achievable and we need to make them achievable. Otherwise, the consequences are unthinkable. So I like the fact that we are in step with a lot of our partner organisations, and I recognise that this is going to take collaborative working, not just between us and our partner organisations and within our district, but with regional government, the combined authority and national government. It's going to require everybody to pull together, but this is where we need to be aiming for. So I admire that and I like it. Having said that, I may be quoting you, John, from a previous meeting, but I like to know what success means. How do we define success? And I think in most of the targets, that's pretty well defined. You've got a statistic or an ambition that is very clear that that's measurable. If we don't meet it, we'll know. But two of them, nature and recovery by 2030 and all degraded peatland to be in restoration by 2038, I just felt there could be a bit more definition in there about how will we know if we've succeeded. So that was my first question. Keeping on the theme of peat, I was really glad to see the inclusion and the attention given to the peatlands in this document. That's something I brought up when this came to the Labour group, what seems like 2 years ago now, a long time. I was a brand new fresh-faced councillor when it came, and I mentioned the peatlands. I brought up that this is a massive carbon sink, that not only do we need to keep growing, but we need to stop degrading, because that's releasing more carbon than we probably are as people polluting. So I'm glad to see that attention. But I noticed that while it's a very clear one of the 12 highlighted targets, there isn't an objective in the nurturing nature section that references the peatlands at all. And I thought that was a bit of an omission. I think we need the objectives to tie into the targets for the document to flow, and most of them do. But I just thought it was a bit odd that peatlands weren't in the objectives. Next, I think something that was just missed entirely, which I think deserves attention, and I did raise this with Will when he was a cabinet member. There's no mention of invasive species at all, which I know it might sound like a relatively minor topic, but things like Himalayan balsam, Japanese knotweed, and even rhododendron can pose a massive threat to local biodiversity. Rhododendrons can destroy newly planted trees if it's allowed to overgrow them. Himalayan balsam can undermine infrastructure because it takes root, undermines the concrete, and then disappears completely, and those cracks fill up with water and freeze in the winter. So I just think it's a bit odd that Kirklees doesn't have something in its strategy document referencing how we're going to try and deal with these invasive species. And finally, to pick on something that John said about inflation, the reference to inflation, that particular wording could age badly, I agree, but I do think we need to retain some kind of reference to the fact that being reliant on fossil fuels makes us vulnerable as a nation to inflationary pressures internationally. We've experienced that these last couple of years. We experienced it I didn't. Some of you experienced it in the 1970s. To have it, I like the reference to the fact that if we can get to a more renewable sources of energy, we actually make ourselves more resilient against those inflationary pressures internationally. I do have more, but I'll leave it there.
So just to address them one by one. So the targets, the nurturing nature targets, the nature and recovery and the degraded peatlands. Those are two targets which, as we've answered in previous questions, are grounded in best practice. So the recovery target is in line with the National Environment Act for recovering nature, and there is a West Yorkshire Combined Authority do now have a mandate to develop a recovery plan for the region, which will incorporate moorlands, and this is in line with their environment strategy as well, so the ambition within that. The degraded peatlands one, again, is in a reflection of the nature and recovery aspect. And as I mentioned earlier, we have that inventory report, which gives us an idea of where we need to target and what our current state of play is, of how we actually get to that point. And the Moorlands for the Future, that was in extensive collaboration with Moorlands for the Future and Peak District National Park about the date that we set for that and the specific wording around that target as well. I think it's a good point in terms of the invasive species, and the absence of direct reference to peatlands in the objectives. The intention is to incorporate that within the first objective, so conserving, enhancing and investing in our natural environment and biodiversity. But I think we can, in parts, we've been clear about what incorporates what. So, for example, food waste within some of the closing the loop aspects, we've made that clearer. So I think we can do that, make it a bit more clear in this part. Yeah, pull it out of that part of the document. And then I think the point around inflation is valid. I think we can look at how we can reword that to make it more in date, I suppose, less out of date.
And I think it might just be about us putting in some clarity of the definitions of what those terms mean, because to make the target clearer, because there are definitions sat within those other documents that we're linking into, but we maybe just need to be very clear about that, so that they're as obvious as the other ones that have got numbers next to them. What does that mean? Because there's a lot of information behind what might be one word.
Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for those responses. Another thing which I felt was a strange omission while I was reading through the report was, while we reference all the partner organisations that we are engaged with and have engaged with, which is fabulous work, by the way, brilliant that you've managed to get all these people together. In my experience, if you can get 5 environmentalists in a room, you'll come up with 6 different opinions about what's best to do. So only 6, yeah, they're getting better. But something I felt was odd by omission was that there's no mention of the National Trust at any point, which I felt was odd, given that I know they're doing an amazing amount of work in my ward, in Marsden Moor, to protect the peatlands, and they're helping. We've got a big project on the go with the White Rose Forest, who are mentioned in here, planting trees right now. So I just thought it's a bit odd to not include them, given how much they are actually doing to help us deliver a lot of these targets. And finally, to revisit some of the points that John made about the governance structure, agreeing, I noticed the absence of elected member presence in that structure, 49 wasn't it? And I agree, I think we should be included because we know our wards best, if I do say so myself. We are well connected, we're well networked, and we ultimately control the council. And I think it's odd that we're not included in that. And then finally, on the monitoring, evaluating and reporting our progress, it says that annual data collection and subsequent reporting against the ambition of the strategy, but it doesn't say who you're reporting to. And might I suggest that one of the bodies you may report to is this one. I think the annual evaluation of how this strategy is going and how we are delivering on these targets and objectives is exactly the kind of role this scrutiny panel should be doing. It fits with our new name, it fits with the ambition that we've said throughout this year to try and put dealing with the environmental problem into every part of the council. Can I suggest that we can help play that role? Thank you.
Thanks. We'll have to check the partner list because I think there was 500 and odd different people, and I'm not sure if the National Trust did attend or didn't attend the workshop, so we'll double check and see whether we had representation from them or not. And if not, then it's a very good point. We maybe need to reach back out to them and engage them.
Sorry, can I just clarify that? Sorry. We did reach out to National Trust. We haven't specified every partner we've engaged with by name in the document. And National Trust were a partner we reached out to. They did engage in one of our workshop processes, but they haven't been as actively involved, say, as Moorlands for the Future have been throughout the process. Yeah.
What else you'd asked, I think. Sorry. Okay, yeah. I mean, it's a clear point from this group, isn't it? And that's why we come here. I think it's valuable input. We need to consider members. We did during the design, so let's consider them during the implementation too. And if we're going to monitor things, then it makes sense for somebody to have oversight of that. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a document of amazing scope, and I must admit, I partially have to agree with Councillor Taylor to a point where I think scope is a potential issue here. There are so many areas where it's fantastic, the ambition, but it's clearly beyond the scope of Kirklees Council to do that. So if that isn't better defined, there's a better chance the document will be hostage to fortune, to circumstances and bodies well beyond what there is control over. I mean, on this there are 2 points in particular, by the way. Closing the loop, I think, and food waste sprung to mind. These stem from consumers consumer behaviour, where they buy from. So to merely make a dent into that in this area, you would have to get on board Sainsbury's, Tesco's, a big supermarkets. You'd have to get on board the people who supply the big supermarkets. You have to get on board the people who supply them from China, from Poland. It's such a vast area. So I'm just interested how you could define that in a way, or how you could possibly, how you think you may be able to get all these bodies on board to actually make any real difference to the closing the loop. Because it's down to, a lot of it is down to manufacturing processes and consumer behaviour. And as far as I'm aware, Kirklees and its councillors and authority doesn't really affect much of that. How do you bring these other people in who can affect that difference? Thank you.
I think the key in this is the partnership approach and the collaboration, we do acknowledge that, and as Kat mentioned it earlier, these targets aren't something one organisation or one individual can achieve by itself. And there is a collective need for action across various different actors, public, private, third sector organisations and individuals in terms of how consumer behaviour and behaviour change across all themes, not just closing the loop. And there's also an acknowledgement in this that there is a need for, there is a reliance in some areas on government action and ambition as well, and more national, broader ambition. And I think that how we engage with large corporate organisations like Tesco, like Asda or any other supermarket, there is an element of that reliance. But I think if you go with the, if you take that collaboration approach, I think you can make the biggest impact by bringing everybody together and actually having a collective effort towards achieving the ambition, rather than everybody going off on their own kind of individual direction, and sometimes working in loggerheads with each other.
Yeah, I still don't envisage how anyone from Kirklees or any county or any place in particular is going to persuade Tesco's or Unilever or Procter & Gamble to change their ways. Or that seems far, far, far beyond the scope. So maybe it's helpful if this was defined in a way which is in scope and control that could be dealt with. So it may be an aspiration is to do one thing, but a more localised immediate objective is these things are within the power of Kirklees to council to control and influence, and these are what we'll do on those things we can influence, and the rest park up in some aspiration document or something which,
Yeah, I think there's things that have to happen at a local level, there's things that have to happen at a national level, there's things that have to happen at an international level. This is a global problem. So people in Kirklees aren't going to solve it on their own, even if we do all co-create, work together and we're all amazing. It requires action from everybody all over the UK, all over the globe, to tackle what is a global issue impacting on all of us, and that applies to all of the themes. So I think our focus has to be on the things that we can, us as a council, us as individuals, us as partners, us as residents, and there is the element of consumer behaviour, and we all have that choice, don't we, when we go to the till, of what we do and don't buy. And there's an awful lot that can be done, particularly on food waste, if you want to do it, and if you've got the right programmes of work in place.
I know, Councillor Taylor, you're wanting to come back in on that specific point. Oh, okay. And then I was going to come to Councillor Bamford if you wanted to speak. So.
Yeah, just exploring that a little bit further as well. Quite a lot of people go to local farm shops thinking they're going to local farm shops because they're buying local produce. But actually quite a lot of the produce that's sold in local farm shops isn't local. And I think that's another area perhaps to consider in that closing the loop. It's not just the Tesco's and the you know, sort of Sainsbury's of this world. It's the local farm shops as well. And people don't have that awareness. And I do worry a bit about this idea that there'll be local affordable food available to people in their locality without having to travel far. I talk about, you know, sort of in my patch where we're a bit in the more rural areas where we do have some local shops, but the cost of the food in there is significantly more expensive. And what this document seems to suggest is people should go to their local shop to buy their food. But that's going to be an awful... I mean, I've got a co-op that's 3 doors away, but the price of beans in my co-op is 3 times the price of the beans in Morrison's. So, yeah, I can go and buy my beans and walk there, but it's going to cost me an awful lot. I can probably afford that. Not everybody can. No. And I think, just whilst we're still on that, Kat, I'm going to talk a little bit about speeding and dog poo.
I'm not sure that's within
this discussion.
Yeah, have you met my dog? I'm sure all councils have the same experience. These are 2 of the issues that get raised frequently in the wards, and they're almost impossible for us as councillors to solve. And the reason they're almost impossible to solve is they're down to individual behaviours. And when things are down to individual behaviours, having a target that says everybody's going to do something, that everybody should carry a poo bag. I'm sure if I check in my pockets, I've probably got a dog poo bag in my pocket. No, hopefully, no, yeah, I've got some in my pocket. Not full ones, obviously. I'll leave them at Will's. But not everybody behaves in the right way. So I think setting ambitions that expect everybody to behave is another example of you setting yourselves up to fail. So you might have an ambition that everybody does something, but your target might be to achieve 80% of it or something like that. Set our target at a level that we realistically have a chance of achieving, so we don't, as you said, set ourselves up with access to fortune.
I think we've had an agreement that you're going to at least have a look again at the wording of the targets.
In terms of the behaviour change element, this is something that I've done quite a lot of work in over the years, and particularly on dog poo, actually, because I used to work for an organisation that was one of their main areas. Keep it tidy. So there are significant improvements that can be made by behaviour change campaigns. Yes, you won't change everybody all of the time, but there is example after example of tackling local environmental issues from fly tipping and litter to dog poo by significant percentages. I'm talking in 70% reduction marks from successful behaviour change campaigns. So I do think that some of those local issues we can tackle. It does require individuals to change, but there is evidence you can change individuals.
I think that's my point. It'd be far better to set our ambition at 70% and achieve it and show we've done a good job than set our ambition at 100%, achieve 70%, then everyone says you failed. That's my point I'm trying to make, really.
Councillor Bamford, did you want to come in on anything?
Yeah, please. I like the document. I like the whole idea of it. So it is aspirational. It is an ambition. And are you going to come back to us with all the targets when they've all been hardened up below it? One I've got is the 100% fleet vehicles to be zero carbon by 2038. That is every vehicle in Kirklees, is it? Because I don't want to go down traverse down a cul-de-sac. Fleet vehicles. Fleet vehicles being bin wagons, every vehicle on the fleet. Is this?
So that is just fleet vehicles specifically. The one that references the sustainable journeys target is the one that references how we move about. So that's a multimodal approach. So private vehicles and public transport, active travel. That is a target that applies to us as a council, but can be pledged to by other organisations and businesses across the district as well if they want to pledge to that.
Yeah. So the commercial vehicle fleet will be carbon.
In line with our climate change target of net zero by 2038, which is a science-based target. That's something we need to be achieving in line with that with the climate emergency declaration anyway.
Do we know what this looks like? Is this going to be electric? Are we looking towards hydrogen? It's just that I can see that there's a hell of a lot of infrastructure improvements to be made before we can go anywhere near fully electric on anything.
Yeah, there's technical advancements that need to be made. I think the detail of that can be outlined in the fleet replacement strategy that would come off the back of the update that would come off the back of the implementation of the strategy. We know in the appendix, I think about 7.4% of our fleet currently is electric from the information we have. But there are options available as to how that achieves. But again, the detail wouldn't sit within this. It would sit within the subsequent action plans and strategies beneath.
Yeah, right. It's 6.9%.
Sorry, apologies.
Do we know, have we got any data on that? Are we looking at that and seeing how these vehicles are actually performing? So we know going forward,
we are involved in, we've got a significant sum of funding via WICA to do some EV work, and that will help us with a whole EV strategy. I think what we need is a proper EV plan and strategy, and we do have a significant amount of funds, or have had a significant amount of funds to help us do some of the EV work, which I think will address some of the things that you're raising. And I think vehicles, your questions about different fuels, there's different technologies coming into train all of the time, isn't there, and technology improvements, but as Rob said, this is rooted in the climate change action plan targets, and they're the science-based targets, which means that they're deemed the achievable targets.
Yeah, thank you. The tree cover figure. Have we identified where we aren't going to lose any agricultural land to trees? Have we identified where this tree cover is going to come from?
Yes, so this is in line with the White Rose Forest target. So there's a very comprehensive data set you developed through LiDAR which is kind of satellite mapping, which plays out the exact locations that are feasible for tree planting. So it's about right tree, right place, or right place, right tree, one of those mantras. But it is all in line with the White Rose Forest and the great work that they're doing, and it's based on that data.
Right, thank you. Back to the peatlands now. Are we working with the landowners because obviously a grouse mower is managed obviously by the shooters and the landowners. The Moorland Association says that rotational burning saves 34% of carbon a year. It stops massive wildfires. It's just, are we working with them?
Sorry. I'm going to make reference back to the project I kind of, in response to Will earlier. I think if we want to make progress on broader land use, you need to work with all the actors involved with that, and landowners being one of them. The Calder and Colne Valley Landscape Recovery Scheme that we have got funding for, that's its core kind of objective, is to work with those landowners, work with land managers, whether that be private owners or whether that be Yorkshire Water, for example, about how we can better manage those landscapes, not just moorlands, all our landscapes across the district, to work towards the broader targets.
Thank you very much.
So Councillor Taylor and Councillor McLaughlin would like to come back in. So I'm going to ask you if you can just do sort of one point and then take it in turn. So we'll go Councillor Taylor first.
So this is back on the fleet target, because the response confused me, if I'm honest. What is that target? Because it says 100% of fleet vehicles. There are fleet vehicles in Kirklees that are not owned by Kirklees. So does it mean all fleet vehicles in Kirklees? Does it mean all Kirklees fleet vehicles? Or does it mean all fleet vehicles in Kirklees that Kirklees works with? So if we've got subcontractors like Suez and things like that, does it mean their vehicles? And my worry is that definition, I'm not clear what it means. So will the public be clear about what it means as well?
So I think we need to put some definitions and terms in the glossary in the back. I think one of the key things that's come through this session is some of the wording or terminology we need to maybe take out and then put a definition in the back so people can cross-reference and understand what we mean. There was some on the nature, wasn't there? And then there's some on the fleet and some on... So I think we need to strip it out and put it into a glossary, Rob, with the definitions so people can be... We're not confusing people.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I knew I'd forgotten something. It's about a couple of the objectives on the Bring It Home in relation to new builds, basically, planning. Making all new buildings built in Kirklees climate ready and operationally net zero, and adopting a fabric first approach in all new builds and building refurbished property. So my basic question is, will current planning laws allow us to be that prescriptive on new developments? In particular, I'm worried about the viability get-out clause that developers have, to great frustration of certain members on this council who I won't name. But basically the developer says, this will make this development too expensive and therefore we don't have to do it. And our hands are often tied when they say that. So I'm just wondering, are we going to require national legislative change for those to be deliverable, or has something happened that I don't know about?
I think it's a combination of both things. Like you said, we have to operate within the constraints and the legal constraints that we've got, but equally as a council, we can develop our own planning policies, documents, supplementary planning guidance that can support some of these things too. So it's a balance between, obviously we have to be within the national legal framework that we're working within, but we do have scope locally as well to influence planning through our supplementary planning documents and through other policies that we can put in place. So I think it is a combination of the both, and this is the constant pattern in this agenda, isn't it? It's not any one person that can do any of this. It's not any one action. It's not any one target. It requires multi-level across lots of different people, which is why we've done a partnership document. But it's not just local either, is it? It's that partnership national and broader and even global to have the impact that we need. But yeah, you're quite right. We can only operate within the constraints of the law, but equally we do have the ability to influence some of our local decision making, don't we? And set some of our own policies and objectives and targets.
Could I just ask briefly what your idea of the flight plan for this is in terms of, sort of time frame, and whether it allows for the strategy to be implemented in time to feed into things like the review of the local plan?
Yes, I would hope that it would allow for that, but I think what would probably be quite nice to do is reflect on some of the comments from here and maybe share it back with all of you as well to show, I mean, that's been the process we've took to date with this. We've asked people what they think, we've gone away, we've tried to reflect that in the document and shared it back. So I'd quite like to do that with all of you here and say this is what we took your comments to mean, bring the document back to you and ask you what you think. So I'd quite like to add that step into the flight path. It's not on there now, but I think that's a good thing to do to reflect some of the things that you've asked and said. But we would hope by summer at the latest we've got this document live and people working on it. So I would hope then it would be able to influence other policy documents around the council.
Can I just check how that fits in terms of scrutiny, the scrutiny work plan? Whether we would be able to fit that in within a meeting, ideally, or whether we would need to get that feedback via email to make sure that it still doesn't hold up that flight plan. Because I think there were lots of nods there. I think it would be really appreciated that we have another chance to see it. So
that's the purpose of us coming, isn't it? So, yeah. Shall we have a conversation, Jodie, about whether it's best done via email or whether there's opportunity to squeeze in maybe another slot on the agenda if timing allows and if agendas allow?
Yeah, Councillor.
It's going to come back in the next scrutiny year anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it would be whoever's the chair of scrutiny next year
to set the work plan. Absolutely, but it was just if there was a need for the strategy to be sort of ready to go before the meetings were back on, we're starting up again, that was all. So it was just to confirm that it wouldn't be holding up the flight path, because I would still want it to happen, to come back to scrutiny, but whether we needed to just think about how that was, on a practical level, how that was done. So, and the only other thing I just wanted to ask was about, you talked about including a community lead to look at the always-on priorities, which I think is really important, but how you were planning to recruit that and make sure that those underrepresented voices are sort of continue to be part of this process.
So we've had a number of community people involved to date. So we do have a network of people that have been involved already. However, we equally have a funding bid that we're putting in that we're partway through that might, if we get that, support us being able to reach out even further to the community and bring community people in. We might not get that though. So there's a number of we've got an existing route which will work and be wonderful, but we might also have a very all singing, all dancing route if we're able to leverage in some additional external funding. So there's a couple of different routes, but we've got members of the community have been engaged to date, but we want to keep engaging people and engage more and more people as we go.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone's contributions. I think there's been some really valuable feedback for your team. Certainly looking at things like stronger definitions, refining or clarifying some of the actions, potentially expanding on some of the objectives, like we had the peat being specifically referenced, given that it's one of the headline targets and things like that. I think you've taken on board the concerns about, sort of ambition versus scope within the council, but equally I think that can be adapted within the document you've put together. And also the fact that you've taken on that a regular reporting to scrutiny would be really valuable, so that we can feed back again. So thank you all. Thank you. And thank you for your time this afternoon. Okay, so we just have to, the last item on the agenda is to look at the work programme. for the remaining part of this year. No, we've got one more, 27th of March we've got, yeah. So I think on the document that you have in front of you, we have the way through procurement coming. Yes, absolutely. So would you, do you want to say that on record, Councillor Taylor? So.
Yeah, so can we should have had an update today on the operational issues at the with bin collections that was promised back in December. So can we ask that we have that in March instead?
Absolutely, Jodie, you're going to look at that, aren't you? Thank you. The other one that's been confirmed for the 27th of March is the events report, the update on events. So as it stands at the moment, the parking strategy review and the parks and green space vision are deferred to next year. And I think part of that was due to flight paths, wasn't it? That some of those were just, the reports are not in a state to be presented. So, there's some items that weren't scheduled for the whole year, but again, that'll be a case of looking at those by the chair in the next municipal year. So, any other comments from anyone? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, go on.
Just to say thank you for stepping into the chair. Hannah, you've done a great job, and I know I don't know, but I assume we're all grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Okay. End of meeting.